My guest today is Jimmy Bogard. Jimmy, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Tell us what you do for a living.
So I mainly software consulting. So I've been in software consulting now since 2008, and I'm gonna stop doing the math because it's depressing a little bit. How long I've been in consulting?
More
But
than a
yeah,
couple of years.
yeah, more than a couple of years. But I've been all around the block doing corporate IT, product company, startup, and then landed in consulting and really enjoyed that for a long time.
Yeah, you're also pretty well known for a couple of open source projects that you created. Tell me about those.
Yeah, of course. So during my consulting career, I I started putting out open source projects of things that we were working on in our projects, and kind of the two big ones that became popular were Automapper and Mediatr. Automapper was meant to solve a problem of we wanted to have these very rich data domain models. You know, everyone's doing like DDD, domain driven design, that sort of thing. So we had very rich models from our database that mapped into these entity models. Um, but when we want to show that information on screens, it's always a dumbed down version of that. It's like it's very simplified, like flattened view. We don't directly return our rich entity models through APIs. We don't show, everything on screens. So we like dumbed it down and said, this is just the information we want to return and the information we want to show. That's commonly known as a data transfer object or DTO. And so we saw this problem of like, we've got, okay, this is the beginning of the project. We knew we were going to have like 1,000 screens in this application. And each one of those was going to have its own like individual DTO for just the information on that one specific screen, so that each screen could just optimize its own data for whatever it was doing there. So we saw this issue of, okay, I'm gonna have 1,000 of these things. Are we gonna have our developers like hand roll each DTO, hand roll all the mapping from the data domain models to these DTOs? Or is there something we can do to help make that process easier for developers? So that's what I was kind of tasked with. My architect came to me and was like, hey, we're going to have this big problem. Figure out how we could best solve it. And so the solution I came up with was this idea of automatically mapping from complex models to simplify DTOs through straightforward conventions. So like as long as the names match up from for the things on the left, the things on the right, like assignment statements, like things on the left, as long as the names match, including obvious things like if you have, product dot category dot name, then if you called something product category name, it would know how to like drop the dots and smash it all together. Like, okay, we can figure that out to like sensible defaults for all these things. So that was the tool. That was the Automapper tool, is to help with that. Um, for us, it also eliminated all the bike shedding arguments that our team was having of like, well, I don't like product category name. I just like product category. We're like, okay, well, that's once. And then we see it done 100 times of just random one-off names. Like, are we spending time adding value to the clients or just like spending time on pointless minutia that doesn't matter? So that was the other kind of value out of Automapper, was enforcing a convention so that the developers could focus on just like building out, valuable features, not like messing around with names of stuff. So that was the first one. That came out back in 2008, 2009, 2008 ish. So quite a long time.
Yeah, still
Um,
going strong.
yeah, exactly. Still going strong. And the other one was Mediator, and that one is a little bit more involved. But the basic idea is that we were building very common patterns with all of our screens that were all basically like you have a API request coming in. There's sort of like UI logic that happens in the first sort of endpoint, but then there's the business logic. And so we were trying to isolate that business logic away from the UI logic and like very isolated use case handlers, if you want to use like clean architecture terms, like use case handlers. And so we saw that again, these all looked almost exactly the same. And being in consulting too, I was seeing across all of our projects, we probably had a half a dozen to 10 at a time. They were all implementing the same common, like, okay, I want to isolate the business logic in a single handler with like, here's the input data, here's the output data. And so I wrapped that all together into an open source project called Mediatr because it basically implements a mediator pattern from the old Gang of Four design patterns book. So that was the other big one, was just trying to wrap up the things that we were doing in all of our projects in open source libraries so that I could use them on the next project. That was the primary goal, was just these are not specific to customer, like their special business domains. It's generic. So the company I was working with at the time, which no longer exists, we made it a point, not just myself, but other developers as well, to look and find these opportunities to leverage common sets of patterns into open source projects so that we could accelerate development for the next client, the next project. And we had a whole system to do exactly this. So the two popular ones that I have are Automapper and Mediatr, but I've got like five others that
Okay.
aren't nearly as popular. But it was the same idea. See common code that has nothing to do with the client, go off to the side, off client books, develop something, make it an open source project, and now I have a nice NuGet package to download and incorporate in projects going forward.
Well, that's cool. And the best part about that is how popular it is and how much time you can put into maintaining these projects and adding new features and responding to that. But also, the worst part of that project is all the time off, you
Yes.
said, off the books, non-billable time that you have to spend
Yeah.
maintaining these and dealing with the community that loves these projects so much. So you made a shift, right? At some point.
Yeah. So the time the company I was working for, Headspring, we didn't know what to do with these things. Like even the first one, Automapper, we had this question of like, well, what do we do with this? We built it off books, so like the client didn't pay for the project, but like the company did, and so they were like, well, what do we do with these things? So at the time, we even had the question like, well, do we sell them as libraries? What do we do? This is back in 2008, 2009, so it was very early days of like open source and .NET land. Um, and we were a fledgling consulting company. I was employee number six. So the idea of selling this on top of trying to build a consulting organization, like that was going to be too much to do. So I said, well, just throw it on Codeplex at the time, going
Uh,
way back, and just make it an open source project. And so over the years, the company would sponsor my time from time to time, say like, oh, if I have time between projects, you can work on these things because it betters, we use them on our client projects, so it betters that. But then I also spend a lot of time on my own, just like, I don't like this thing. I really screwed up that. So, there are times I just be spinning on the couch, like I want to redo this thing because it really annoys me, whatever. But I left that organization like literally a week before lockdown for COVID, so it was like 2020, to go independent. And then later that year, the company sold to Accenture, and so the company no longer existed as well. But over time, what I realized was I lost my main sponsor for the projects.
Now you
They
got to do it on
sponsor,
your own time.
and it turns out that my consulting company does not want to sponsor my open source time because all my free time, and this is something I realized well after the fact. I assumed going into this, starting my solo consulting, that I would have all this free time. I'd spend like half my time client projects, half my time, learning F sharp, learning different, whatever. But it turns out like the other part when I wasn't on projects was spent like growing that and trying to find other projects because that was the
You
business. I was trying
spend
to
your
grow the business.
half time on billable code, half the time on selling your services, half the time on open source project, and half the time on on learning new skills. That
Yeah.
math doesn't add up.
No, it didn't add up at all. Which if I, people told me that at the time, I was like, no, this time it'll be different. It's not different. So yeah, the sort of realization came, I was like 5 years in or so. I looked back and said, okay, how have things been going? Like I really enjoyed I enjoy consulting. I enjoy building stuff for clients. I love being part of long-term things that we actually ship stuff, whatever. I really enjoy that. But what I found was that because I was also doing all the other stuff with having a solo consulting company, that it left zero time for any kind of open source stuff. So I went back and looked at like my GitHub, the little graph that people brag about of like, here's all the green squares, and mine was like almost all black squares. Um, of like no activity except for, Microsoft would release a new version of .NET, and then like an hour later, people would be opening GitHub issues of like, why don't you support the latest version of like, oh gosh, okay, go put out something else. But it wasn't doing anything
Right.
like material or big. When I was with Headspring, the consulting company, we would spend we would have meetings where we would go feedback into the projects. I would go through projects and see, well, what are you doing with this? That was all gone. Like I wasn't seeing what people were doing. I wasn't trying to improve things. I was just sort of barely hanging on, languishing on the vine there. So I decided I need to do something. I need to make a change. Whatever it is, I need to make a decision on what to do. So what I would decide to do after talking to a lot of folks was to try try a go at having some sort of commercial venture for these projects and have them self-sustaining, have people that who are using it and find value, like actually then monetarily sponsor the projects through licensing, through some sort of scheme at least to pay for their development going forward.
Okay, and so you made that decision, and did it go smoothly? What were the challenges?
Um, So, I mean, kind of the first thing I had to figure out was just like what model should I pick to do this. So I wound up leaning on a lot of other folks that had gone through this exact same process, and no one had the same journey as myself. But a lot of other folks have had this sort of issue where they build an open source project, it becomes popular, and then they realize like my time spent doing it is no longer like the fun learning time. It is like now work. I mean, I still enjoy
Job.
doing it, of course, but it's take like the time I want to spend on it is not getting paid for anymore,
Right.
and so I have to balance that against things that do actually put food on the table. So I needed to figure out, well, what possible options. And so luckily, like a lot of other folks, there's probably 20 people I talked to in the .NET community that went through the same sort of process. So what I landed on was this idea of having a dual license commercial open source license scheme. So the idea is that there's a certain set of folks for this that'll still stay free and free to use, and then based on certain conditions, then the other set of folks will then pay for it. And then I got to figure out like what is that? What are the conditions? What does it do? So like some models are like a freemium sort of model, which is basically you have a sort of base tier, and then you pay for like extras,
Extra
just
features.
like extra features. Um, I looked at that and decided that there wasn't enough. Well, the people that I talked to that went through this route, they said the challenge is always like, what do you put in the freemium version versus what do you make charge for? And the tension is always going to be pulling towards charging people. So you
Sure.
start basically put less and less in the free version, whatever. So that seemed complicated, and I wanted to keep things simple. So I wound up going with more of a model with a sort of community model where if you're a smaller company or if you're a solo developer or if you're using for non-commercial purposes, then it stays free for you.
Hmm.
But if you're a commercial organization, which is I guess what I developed it for was like I developed this for enterprises to use on like big back end, back office applications that run things that maybe you don't see, but like run their organization. So I was like, well, they're finding value in it. So typically organizations that use something and find value that runs our business will pay for those sort of things. So I'm like, well, that's who I'm looking at, the people that find value and then, of course, have over a certain revenue, then like that's who would actually then pay for it. So that's the model I went for is a dual license and having a revenue limit that says if you're over this revenue limit, then then you have to pay for a license.
Okay, so you can still use it to make money. You can still use it for free and make money.
Yeah,
But once you start making a lot of money, then that's when the licensing kicks in. You're required to pay for it.
yeah,
How do you
yeah.
enforce
So
something
you
like that?
Oh, that's a great question. So one of the nice things of being a consultant for, still consulting on projects, I still have like a stand up in an hour or so, is that I get to see the other side of this. So I've been on the other side of like, okay, I need a PDF tool or something that spits out Excel reports or something that spits out, control libraries. So I've seen different sort of licensing schemes. And one of the things I always hated was libraries or components that were really intrusive to the process. or required a lot of like, difficulty in acquiring because, it's no developer really wants to go to the boss and be like, hey, so fun story, we have this library we need to pay for. So I want to make that process easy and not put too many barriers in terms of development. So in terms of enforcement, I said, one, I only care about production usage. This is a library that runs in production, so I only want folks to pay for it that run it in production. If you're not running things in production, then who cares, right? You're not making money off of whatever you're building yet, so why should I charge you for something that you're not, profiting off of yet? So only have to pay for production usage. Um, in terms of enforcement, though, I saw a lot of other schemes that were universally reviled in the .NET community.
Okay.
Schemes like uh, I saw some things like either like reducing functionality or introducing friction to individual developers. Things like slowing down build times or putting like like putting very intrusive things in front of them. And I always hated that as a developer. Like I don't mind paying for something, but please don't make my life miserable.
Right.
So I thought, okay, let's the companies that want to pay for it will pay for it. So I'll just make sure that people know that, hey, this is now a commercial offering, and then here's how you can go get a license. So at this
Yeah.
point,
But
there's a
you didn't
license
want to. You
key.
didn't want to degrade the free experience.
No, of course, or like even like a license lapse. No one wants their production app to be affected because a
Uh,
license key is invalid. Like that's again, like to me that's an insta delete of the package. Of like if you degrade, like one thing to degrade developer experience, but to degrade production, then that's like a yep, you're out. So for me, it's just what's the least intrusive way of doing it. So for me, I just do log messages. It's a license key, and if it doesn't, if it's invalid, missing, or expired, then you see log messages, and that's it. There's no other enforcement because
yeah.
again, that's a trust issue for me as a developer, and so I want to like have that trust issue as well. So that's the thought. Is like I'll trust users if people want to, go around it, they will anyway. So like
Sure.
whatever, I had this sort of calculation that there's some percentage of people that do find value and will pay for it, and I just will focus on those folks. Or
Right.
there's people that want to use it like the right way, so I'm going to focus on those folks. The people that don't, then well, I mean, whatever. I'm not going to go chase after them.
Yeah.
It's
There's
not
this
worth
point
my
of
time.
diminishing returns. It's not worth your time. Exactly.
I want to focus on making like the experience better, the documentation better, the product better, not chasing, the people that want like that's fine, whatever. That's just the cost of doing business. I look at it.
Right. Now, you said a few years ago you became an independent consultant. So you already had started a business even before you decided to monetize your open source project. Is this different? Is doing this selling this product different from selling your time?
Yes. So when I went independent, it was like about the smoothest transition you could possibly have. I just went from full time to contracting at the place I was already at, and then I already made a ton of contacts just being in consulting for so long that
Sure.
I mainly, I usually don't even contract directly with people. I work through agencies that I'm part of large projects, whatever. But this is way different. It's way more transactional. You even have a storefront that people can click a button to buy something. I didn't have to do that with consulting. I make relationships with people. I figure out what their onboarding process is, and then I figure out where to send invoices. But it's just a monthly invoice I send to people, and that's it. This I'm like, well, people want to put in their credit card. Like, well, how do I how do I do that? How do I even hook into say someone bought with a credit card? Here's your license key. Like just solving that problem is something I had to figure out along the way. So luckily, there's way more stuff these days than when I got started in consulting to make that sort of stuff easier. There's all sorts of online SaaS providers of this sort of thing, but I had to stitch them all together into a single storefront that I had to build. Um, which again, I hadn't built a website in a while that I owned. I was like from scratch. So just I'm usually building back office websites for other people, but for something for myself, I'm like, oh gosh, what even should I build on top of? I had to figure out for this like
Yeah.
small website. So that was a big challenge, just the technology side, but also what the licensing should be, what the cost, the price should be, how it should have different, should have different tiers of stuff. So it was a ton of research and development and interviews and legal before the stuff went live. So that was probably like 9 months. I made the decision, I'd say probably September of last year, where I started looking at this. And it wasn't until I guess April 2nd is when I announced I'm going to do this, because I decided, okay, it's feasible. There seems to be interest. I have a model in my head of how I want to do it. Legal said, yes, this can work. So, okay, I announced. And then 3 months after that is when I was able to actually launch it and get it out there for folks to buy, along with actually working a full-time job doing consulting, because I needed to, I had projects and stuff that I needed to ship and stuff like that. So definitely a process to get to where it is today. Of course, it's still not done. I launched with the most basic sort of functionality of being able to purchase stuff, and then immediately someone said, "Okay, can you pay by invoice?" Like, well, there's an online credit card form, but most enterprises do want to pay by invoice. So how do I do that? So just figuring out like how do I sell to people has been mainly what I've been dealing with. It's just how do I run a product company?
How much, you mentioned that you reached out to other open source project maintainers. How much did you reach out to people outside of the tech community, lawyers and the financial people and folks like that? How much did you rely on that?
That Not as much. So usually what I did was I would talk to someone who would refer me to someone else. Like, oh yeah, you want to talk to our biz dev person. So things like one good example, if I talked to someone that said, okay, so they had a similar model of there's a community free license with a revenue limit. But in general, they told me that usually the limit you see is 1 million US dollars in revenue. But in the United States, at least, that doesn't pay that many developer salaries. Honestly, it's like with benefits and all that sort of healthcare and all that sort of stuff, it's like maybe a team of 10, probably a team of 5 to 6, including like someone has to run the show. So that's just not that big of a team, and they probably won't want. They're probably looking at having, not having as many sort of operational expenses with that. So I said, okay, I'll put my finger to there and say, well, let's make it 5 million instead. So a biz dev person told me that like 1 million is too small. What's the right number? I don't know. So I just said, how about 5? Whatever. Pricing it as well. They made it very clear. Like initially I thought, well, what would be the cost of a team to develop this? But the reality is like teams don't want to, like most teams don't, or like most organizations don't want their teams spending time developing infrastructure code. So their cost isn't the time spent. It's the value provided to the team of not doing that and spending the time on other good stuff. So I kind of looked at it as well. It's like, well, what do the people kind of peg their prices at, and what do I want to do for mine? So I even looked at licensing schemes of per developer licenses versus some other thing. So like my licensing is not for developers, it's for the entire team, because I also thought like this values to a team as a whole, not like one individual developer. So I thought it's easier to say, what's the cost for a team, a group, an organization, instead of like, oh, a new developer comes on board. Oh no, we got to go acquire this other one-off, license. Like, well, let's make this easier. Just like, it's for the whole team. If someone comes on, who cares? Like, it's all part of the same bucket, whatever.
You probably have to have some way of them enforcing it as well to make sure. I
Yeah.
only have 10 licenses, and the 11 people are using it. Now
Oh
that's on
yeah,
you
this
to
whole
have
scheme
some.
of like, oh, you have to sign licenses to developers via email. Like that sounds like a hassle. And I didn't
Yeah,
like doing that from a developer either. I'm like, okay, this person's coming on board. I mean, it doesn't like for something like IDEs, like Microsoft licenses, that makes sense. Like you have accounts and that's. But for me, I'm like, well, how can I make this really easy for people to buy and not worry about this extra stuff? I was like, well, they just have one license for everybody and call it a day.
awesome. This is pretty cool. Is there? We're just about out of time, but is there anything we haven't covered that you feel you really want to tell people about?
Um, Gosh, I don't think so. I mean, one of the things I'm looking at is just now that I'm going through this venture, what things can I do that I couldn't do before, even at Headspring with consulting. So I'm looking at those sort of things. Like I'm launching pretty soon a Discord server for licensees for both community and paid for to have a
Okay.
like now we can I'll be on there and I'll maintain the server for everybody versus just some like rando putting a server out there. It's something that I'll have that premium access for. Um, but otherwise, no, it's been fun so far. It's been a lot of work, but it's I'm happy that these projects now have like actual real sponsorship and have runway to keep going in the future. That's why I did it, is to make sure that they stay, not just like they're just being like kind of not just sort of maintained, but like actively developed and improved. So I'm happy that that is secured going forward now.
How is business so far? It's been you're still in your first year,
It's only 3 months now. Yeah.
3 months.
So yeah, I've I definitely have customers. I hit like 100 customers over the
Great,
first couple months or so. So I was like, okay,
congratulations.
then there's definitely, you have no idea. I don't know if it's going to be one or 1,000 or two. You just don't
Yeah,
know until you put this out there. So it hit all my goals of this is going to be self-sustaining. So that's what I was most like. I just want this to be self-sustaining so that it can be improved and going forward. So it's hit that goal. So I'm happy to hit that. And I can, now work on making these better for everybody.
that is awesome. Now I know you do a lot of public speaking, and I'm going to see you in Orlando next week at Dev Intersection. But
Yes.
this video might not be out before that conference.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else scheduled after that?
Oh yeah. So Azure Dev Summit, which is the week after, that's in Portugal. So that's like
Wow, beautiful
it's
country.
very focused on Azure and cloud and that sort of stuff. Later that month, I'll be in Netherlands for Tekorama
Uh-huh.
and probably some others, but I'd have to go look at my session eyes because that's where it all lives. But
All right,
those ones coming up here.
Jimmy. Thank you so much. I wish you the best of luck, and I'm thank you for teaching me a thing or two today.
All right, thanks, David. I used to have a lot of friends, but they've all been eaten by AI technology, and now they're just husks of people regurgitating the same thing over and over again. I wish I could have a happier ending here, but AI is coming to eat us all.